So we're here last week. Thursday's the big day, and we are joined by Tom Baldwin.
Yet again.
Keir Starmer's biographer.
Friend of the podcast.
Friend of the podcast. Long-time Labour insider, fair to say.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
I've done my time.
And as you said, biographer of Keir Starmer, book's doing very well. So tell us how you're feeling you must be doing a huge amount of media and chasing around.
Yeah, I think when I did the Spanish-speaking service for French TV, I realised I may have spread myself a bit thin. But it's definitely, I've become a sort of global ambassador for the book. I'm not sure it's even on sale in
it will be,
the Republic of China. But
it will be. From Friday, there'll be lots of foreign publishers bidding for it.
And how do you feel it's been going, the campaign? How would you've seen plenty of campaigns. How would you summarise this one?
It's a strange campaign because... the narrative at the start of it, the media wants to change the narrative because they're bored. They're bored of saying Keir Starmer's going to win. So at the start of it was going to be Labour stumble, Rishi Sunak climbs back off the floor as a sort of
tax bombshell,
lightweight Rocky. I mean, and then the sort of Tory party kept sort of stabbing itself in the face with a fork repeatedly, and it became quite hard to do the Tory comeback story. And so then people started talking about a sort of Tory extinction event. That was quite fun to talk about for a while. And then Farage enters, and then you've got the sort of excitement about right-wing populism, which of course the left media repeat ad nauseum because that's what they do, and that's how right-wing populism thrives. And you had the sort of stuff about Diane Abbott, and media were rubbing its hands. It's going to be the greatest comeback ever. It's now kind of, I worry slightly from a Labour point of view that if Labour win, probably quite a big majority with 37% of the vote, the left will be saying, we didn't get as many votes as Jeremy Corbyn. The right will be saying the real winner is Farage. And we're going to go into this battle between grown-up, sensible government and the sort of raw, ragged flames of right-wing populism. And it's going to be a very, very different political battleground. And a new Labour government coming in, I think I sort of said in the European this week, is it'll be only the fourth change of government in half a century.
Yeah.
Should be a big moment. And I think a lot of people will conspire to go, sort of meh.
Yeah.
But on the populist point you made, Tom, which is very interesting, because I saw in The Guardian today, Starmer was interviewed by Pippa Crerar, and he said quite pointedly that you can't ignore the populists and the nationalists. What you have to do is come up with a progressive answer to the points they make. So what, in a more granular sense, might that amount to in, say, the first year of a Starmer government, or the first couple of years?
I think it's very important that you're showing change is possible.
Yeah.
That, Starmer says, the best way to restore faith in democracy, in politics, this lack of faith in democracy and politics, which fuels populism, is to show that you can get something done. Mm. Rather than pretend you can fix everything with a 3-word slogan and then you fail and people are more disillusioned, I think that sense of we're taking some steps, we're fixing your potholes. If you can fix some potholes, well, you've done more than this government's done.
Yeah.
And so just showing that government works again, that's going to be really important. What they mustn't do is try and match right-wing populism with their own angry populism. It doesn't work. The right's better at doing it. And I don't think we can be the alt-centre, right?
No, absolutely not. It's a very good way of putting it. But it's interesting that he put it in such bold terms, which was these grievances clearly aren't going to go away. We're recording this on Monday in the wake of the first round of the French parliamentary elections, in which the National Rally's done very well, the far-right National Rally, and with the possibility of a Trump victory now, a little bit more likely than it was pre the debate. This is going to be something that will sort of not overshadow but be part of Starmer's world. And it's actually an interesting and quite strong line, I think, that populism in the end always fails because it offers simple solutions to complex problems. But if Starmer is saying, look, I understand why you feel the way you feel, but here's a programme that will take time, that requires maturity and, the big ask, patience. There aren't really many progressive parties in the world saying that in terms at the moment in the world.
I think that's right, and I think that's him at his best. Sort of grown up, sensible government, trying to do the right thing in the country's interest rather than some particular party interest. That he's very good on all that, and I think there will be a battle of wills with the media And what's going to get the most coverage? I mean, one of the statistics I remember most from 2016, when Trump first won in America, is only 20% of people or something had Twitter accounts. But 80% of Americans knew what Trump was tweeting because CNN, the New York Times were repeating it ad nauseum. Yeah. And I think people are drawn to this flame of populism because it's exciting. And we've had so much politics as spectacle.
Yeah.
And not politics of actually doing stuff. And what Starmer stands for is doing stuff.
But is the centrist left-wing press not right to be amplifying the scary nature of what these populists are saying? You can't just ignore it, can you?
No, I'm not saying you should sort of we'll have an actor playing Nigel Farage.
Back
to the good old days.
Yeah, I always thought that was actually very damaging because the actors were rather more articulate than Martin McGuinness and Jerry Adams. They did a great job. They projected all the things that actors do. No, I'm not saying that. I think there is actually, I think, a sort of, I don't want to sound Nixonian, but I think there is a quiet majority in this country which is sick of three-word slogans and easy answers and pretending that you can fix everything. And I think they're sick also of dividing this country. I think a politics which looks like this country, reflects the contours of this country, is really attractive, but it's quieter. It's not so exciting.
But what if we're in... I mean, Matt shared an extraordinary interview with Steve Bannon from the New York Times.
Yeah, David Brooks today in the New York Times. Bannon's about to go into jail, and he had a chat with Bannon.
And some of the stuff in it was, I mean, compellingly extreme, wasn't it?
Demented, but compelling.
I mean, about how, he doesn't see himself as a journalist or in the media. He's an activist. He's in a war room. He's a soldier. I mean, what if we are actually in a war? I mean, I don't mean a literal war, but what if we're in a fight for what we believe in? Are we bringing a knife to a gunfight?
No, I think you're bringing good, sensible government. Look, you can have the charge of the Light Brigade, and you can try and match the glory and the gore and everything like that, or you can show that sensible government produces better outcomes. And I think kind of a sense of just, Starmer has this phrase about a politics that treads more lightly on people's lives. Yeah. Rather than this constant existential crisis. If we let one more boat cross the channel, our whole way of life will be over. Yeah. It won't.
Yeah.
What about, let's try and meet halfway on this. And let's say it's counterproductive to try and match populists in terms of hysterical rhetoric, and I'm with you on that. But surely he needs to be a teacher politician, in the sense that, you're right, the sort of deeds, not words, getting things done stuff is clearly the only long-term solution to this quandary.
Yeah.
But while you're doing it, you can't just sort of shut the door and say, you just wait 2 years, you'll see, go down in maternity service and you'll see what I mean. You have to actually have at least a narrative and a means of explaining compellingly what you're doing. So I suppose my question is, I think the campaign has been a very odd period for the reasons you cited, not least because it's been sort of dominated by the Farage virus. That's had a gravitational pull, to mix metaphors. But once Starmer is in number 10, as one must assume he will be on Friday, literally the whole world will be looking at him. Now, what he then says on the cobbles of number 10 and in the King's, what comes out in the King's speech and what he says in his first major speech and so on, these things really matter. And I just wonder, I know, and very much from your book, he doesn't like showiness, he doesn't like emotionalism, but does he have the capacity to explain, to make voters feel seen and explain to them this is not just the defenestration of the Tories, this is actually a moment where things are going to change, and here's how?
I think how you explain it is exactly part of the problem. I think you need to tell a story about why the Tories have lost and why Labour have won. And historically, I think Labour haven't been very good at that. So, in 1997, they had sort of sleaze and incompetence, which didn't outlast our own sleaze and incompetence. There's always sleaze and incompetence.
Yeah.
I think historically, the Tories have been better at it. So, 79, you had the dead going unburied in the streets during the winter of discontent. 2010, you had this mythological idea that Labour's spending on schools and hospitals caused a global financial crisis. But I think you have to be built on solid ground. So Johnson in 2019 told this story about millions of former coal miners voting for Brexit because they loved his japery, And it was actually built on sand. It was an incoherent coalition. So you need coherence to what you're saying about your story, but you mustn't, I really can't emphasise this point about hysteria and drama and spectacle. It's not what Starmer does well. I don't think he should try. So I remember 2016 referendum. I remember trying to get an Ed Miliband speech going. And the Remain campaign said, no, we're in an arms race for just who can say the most sort of extreme thing, like World War III, or we're all going to be living off grass if Brexit happens. And you ended up with no one believing either side. And I do think we should sort of cleave to truth and honesty as much as we can. You know, politics is about exaggerating and simplifying a story, of course, but not just kind of playing into the sense that we're in a series of existential crises and we're clinging on by our fingertips to try and introduce a measure of calm. And there's huge global challenges which you shouldn't be calm about, but it doesn't mean you panic. And I think that sort of steady hand, rather than running around in a panic, screaming abuse back at them, I think we'll lose the latter battle. I think we can win the former one.
Do you think he'll get a break at all from the right-wing press?
I think when you're a new government, there is excitement. I think there's just the scale of change, different faces and different ideas. It is exciting. The thing is to harness that energy to show some difference in people's lives. So you could waste the entire first term abolishing the House of Lords, introducing a new system of government in Whitehall, both really important things to do, but it starts 40,000 feet above the heads of the electorate.
Right.
And I think you should start kind of trying to get waiting lists down, fixing potholes, showing some change in people's lives, rather than fiddling around with the Constitution, which is creaking and out of date and all these things, but it's not the most important thing you need to do.
The expectation, though, for rapid change may be something that he ends up getting crucified by, because there was a 5 Live interview with, I can't remember who it was, but I remember the caller, and it was Keir's being grilled on 5 Live, and the woman was asked by, it was Nikki Campbell, and Nikki Campbell asked the woman, said, well, okay, NHS waiting lists, how long do you think it's going to take, realistically, to start making a material impact? And she sucked her teeth and she said, it's going to take a long time. I mean, it could take 6 months. And I thought it could take 6 years, and the idea that we're going to see a rapid change beyond optimism, a material rapid change, he's going to have to manage that sense of expectation, isn't he?
And he's got a bigger problem too. I think, the line which I know he wrote himself about, we've had enough of sticking plaster solutions, we need to actually fix long-term problems. That's very much him. But he's also got to find some sticking plaster solutions in the short term, not least because of this debate that everyone's now aware of, that hard-wired into the economy for the next 2 years are £20 billion worth of spending cuts. And the way people see it at the moment, including Paul Johnson, the IFS, I think has been a little bit too even-handed between the two parties. Tories are got some pie in the sky numbers, Labour's fully costed the sort of same plague on both houses, and that's caused quite a lot of irritation. But he's got a fair point that, he says you either have to raise taxes or you have to cut spending.
Or borrow.
But they've used up, they've right up the ceiling of what they can borrow. Labour's answer is, no, we're going to grow the economy. That's great, but most people think growing the economy takes time. It involves industrial planning, infrastructure, changing skills. So how do you get a sugar rush of growth into the economy in the short term? Well, you're going to need some short-term fixes. You're going to need, probably a big deregulation. It will look quite Trussian in some senses, right? Lots and lots of business-friendly measures designed to boost confidence, boost consumer spending, to get growth. Now, you've got to balance that with some of the long-term stuff, the stuff which will look much more social democratic. I don't know how they're going to do that. That's a tricky one for them to pull off.
Do you believe him when he says he's going to draw stumps every day at 6 p.m, which I saw he said on Virgin Radio? I mean, that sounded to me like a triumph of hope over experience, really.
No, I don't think he's been doing that in opposition, but he does try and he does try and get home on Friday nights.
Yeah,
he does try and spend time with his kids and his wife Vic, and I think it's really important to him that he does that.
It's a good thing too.
Yeah,
intrinsically.
But it's not. I think, and you don't have to sort of have the lights burning until 3 a.m. I must work harder to actually be a good Prime Minister. I think he does work hard. I think he's always worked hard. But I think that sense of, I'm going to put myself through some sort of physical endurance in order to do this job. That's probably not what you want from a Prime Minister. So I doubt he'll be home for tea every night. But I think he will try and still create a bit of distance, some real life for himself. And I think it's more important for him than for almost any politician I've known, because he doesn't locate himself in politics. His identity isn't built in politics, so you could on some sort of ideological spectrum, or in the friends he's made in politics over 50 years, because he hasn't been a politician for 50 years.
Yeah.
So he draws his values and his sense of self from football, family, friends, and he needs those roots open if he's going to carry on being the person who decided to come into politics to change Britain in the first place. And so it's actually how he refreshes his sense of self as much as getting a bit of time off and seeing his kids.
There was a good, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a good clip of Jeff Bezos talking about his morning routine. And recently, and he said he doesn't have a meeting until 10 a.m. He likes to potter about, have breakfast with the kids, read the newspaper, have some coffee. And he has all of his important meetings before noon, because that's when he needs his high IQ answers. And he said, and I thought this was absolutely spot on, he said, when you're the top man, your job isn't to make 1,000 decisions a day. It's all about the quality of a few big decisions you make. And I think maybe we have put too much expectation on politicians to always have the answer about everything, an instant, quick assessment. And it'd be quite refreshing for people to say, I don't know, I'm going to have to think about that,
It's a bit like Harry Kane's work rate, isn't it? As long as he gets 2 touches of balls, one of them is a goal. We don't really care.
That's right.
You don't have to be chasing, don't have to be closing down, don't have to be pressing.
That's right. I'm not entirely convinced
no,
about
I'm
that.
not about Harry Kane, actually, but we'll see.
What about his gang? Because I remember when we had the last change of government, which was 2010, people saying to me that it was very odd at first, because you'd been operating as this raggedy group of opposition politicians who saw each other all the time, and then you were all dispersed across Whitehall into these big buildings, and you only saw each other, cabinet meetings and subcommittees, and then informals, bilaterals and so on. But basically you were suddenly apart, and there was resentment around the people who were all the time close to Cameron, which included Clegg because of the position of the cabinet office, and Steve Hilton, and Osborne next door, and but everyone else was dispersed. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying who in the early phase of his Downing Street years will be the gang, who will be the people that will be the inner circle. Morgan McSweeney, tell us about him.
Well, Morgan McSweeney is a phenomenon. He is sort of ultimate political insider nerd. He probably doesn't need a spreadsheet of all the different officials of every constituency led party. He probably knows them off by heart.
So I bet most people don't even know who we're talking
about. So Morgan McSweeney is someone who is sort of born from County Cork in Ireland, came over, got involved in local Labour politics in Lambeth, then got involved in taking on the far right in Barking, and in 2015 he ran Liz Kendall's leadership campaign, which, for people who think he's got a sort of non-stop stream of success, for anyone who remembers Liz Kendall's leadership campaign in 2015, she got 4.5% of the vote. But he learns from failure.
Right.
Defeat is a great teacher. And after Corbyn came in, he set up something called Labour Together, which wasn't just about Labour winning. It had sort of blue Labour, sort of a lot of sort of sense of communitarianism in it. And he was beginning to do a lot of polling, a lot of focus groups about what the Labour selectorate, the membership, is. And he saw that it's not just sort of extreme socialists, Corbynistas. There's actually kind of quite a lot of people motivated by values, homelessness, things like that. And then there's also quite another big chunk of Labour Party who just really wants to win.
Yeah.
And so he saw there was a coalition that could be built to defeat Corbyn. And at a time, a lot of people were throwing their hands up in the air. It served everyone's purposes, the left, the right, the media, to say Corbyn's in complete control of the Labour Party. No one can ever win leadership of the Labour Party without support of Unite or Momentum, this grassroots activist group that Corbyn had. They turned out to be paper tigers.
Yeah.
Because Starmer won, and he won by a margin against the Corbynista candidate, which was Rebecca Long-Bailey. And there's quite a lot of sort of history being written very hastily rewritten by journalists now, who are trying to paint somehow Starmer as a Corbyn candidate in 2020. He wasn't. Everybody knew he was a centrist candidate. A lot of the people who now claim betrayal didn't vote for Keir Starmer. Owen Jones didn't vote for Keir Starmer, right? How can he be betrayed?
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's quite an important point.
Owen can be betrayed by people he doesn't even know. He's got that. He's just got that within
I
his
still,
DNA.
I still think we need to hear more from the group he set up called We Deserve Better.
Yeah,
because it's gone strangely
still
silent. I don't know.
It must have
this is
raised
my
quite
whole
a few
point.
quid.
Is
I wonder
I'd
what
like
they've
to
done
know what, how they're doing and how they're feeling.
Yeah, well, that's very nice of you. It's empathetic.
We Deserve Better.
It's a tough time.
It's the best name any political group has ever had, I think. We, just us.
Here's a question for you. Should Keir Starmer go to the final of the Euros if England...
Yes.
Should he go to the semis if they get into the semis?
Oh, semis. Not sure.
Not sure, but the finals?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the country would expect him to be there and he'd want to be there.
Yeah. I'm sure that's the case. Yeah, no, for sure.
But we're digressing from Morgan McSweeney.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes, yeah. Who is now?
We're getting onto football too early.
Yes, we've had one Harry
Kane
Kane
it's all
reference,
over, but it's
one
not.
Euros.
So Morgan McSweeney will be an essential part of Starmer's Downing Street, but I think they're very wary of him being kind of Steve Hilton or, God forbid, Dominic Cummings. Right?
Yeah.
So he's not going to be roving around as a free, but I think he'll have a very precisely defined role, and it won't be governmental. It'll be about campaigns, and I think that's important.
What will his title be?
That'll be sort of. But
so who's the analogy then? If it's not Cummings, is it like Alistair Campbell?
No, Alistair was comms. Alistair was comms and strategy. And look, I think we talked earlier about there's this looming battle with the far right, and the campaign in that sense doesn't stop. You need to start getting ready for the next one. And so and then there'll be big figures like Sue Gray, former civil servant, famed for her report into Partygate, who knows her way around Whitehall. She was a sort of someone wants to go to me as the Harvey Keitel of recent governments. She knows how to get things done, right? And there's figures will emerge. There's big characters, Matthew Doyle's done a fantastic job with comms. He's going to be going over, no doubt about that. So there's these figures will emerge in the sort of the officials, but I think it's also important to talk about the shadow cabinet, because they're a very unusual shadow cabinet. It's the most working class shadow cabinet I've seen in my lifetime. Not just Starmer, who himself becomes one of the most working class background for a generation of any Labour leader. Yeah.
I'm joking.
You might have heard that his dad was a toolmaker, but most people haven't.
Yeah.
Only one in 10 people
Keeps
know
that one quiet.
Story.
Really?
Yeah, that's the trouble.
How do you know that?
Luke Trill's polling for More in Common.
Really? What, he asked people, did you know Keir Starmer's dad was a toolmaker?
Yeah. Well, do you know what Keir Starmer's dad did? And only 1 in 10 could say.
Really?
Yeah.
Just sorry, we are on a good thread, but let me just interrupt that. Why? Famously, Keir reacted very badly when an audience laughed at him saying my dad was a toolmaker, and he got really tetchy with them, and he seemed hurt, and he didn't seem to understand that they were laughing because it had become a bit of a meme. Does he get that people are on his side? He's not going to become another tetchy, chippy Rishi Sunak kind of guy.
No, but I think he gets tetchy he gets annoyed at the shallowness of political discourse.
Right.
I mean, you've seen quite a lot of these profile interviews.
Well, he's going to be
recently.
quite annoyed then, isn't he? I know, I'm not kidding, though, because what's coming his way, like it or not, is a whole shit ton of shallowness, right?
But the point he makes is, when he goes to meet a group of businessmen, they don't say, can you tell us a joke?
Yeah,
They
of
don't
course.
say, can you hang yourself on a wire and flap some Union Jacks? They say, what's your plan for the economy? All these endless interviews. What's your favourite biscuit? When and where did you feel most lonely? What objects do you always carry with you? I mean, these are not qualifications to become Prime Minister. And I think he gets annoyed by that. And, I mean, somebody wrote a column, I think Hugo Rifkin in the Times, say, this is his Achilles heel. I'm not sure. I think if you're going to build this brand around seriousness and getting things done, maybe we should stop wasting our interview time with the Prime Minister or the man who may be Prime Minister by asking him about the biscuits he likes or his favourite kind of sock, and start actually asking about what he wants to do, because I think people are actually quite interested in what he wants to do.
Didn't stop him posting a selfie at Taylor Swift, though, did it?
I think it's quite important that he showed that he had a bigger crowd than Jeremy Corbyn.
Good answer.
He wasn't on stage, though, to be fair. She didn't invite him up to sing.
Not yet.
Yeah.
But going back to the gang and the shadow cabinet, I presume he'll have to give Angela Rayner a pretty big Prescott-style portfolio. Yeah. No, but I mean, she's going to be a big player, isn't she?
Yeah, and she's another of those working class people.
Exactly,
in the shadow cabinet. I mean, she left school at 16, pregnant, and her life story, I think, is one of overcoming things. Rachel Reeves spent her childhood beating posh boys at chess. She's about overcoming, about don't underestimate me. I'm going to show you. Wes Streeting, his family, actually involved in organised crime. Not as a media friend, but in the East End. I mean, there's Bridget Phillipson, brought up by a single mother on benefits. Pat McFadden, youngest child of 7 in Glasgow. His parents emigrated from Ireland and spoke Irish at home. Right? These are incredible stories of overcoming. And I think there's an edge to this shadow cabinet which hasn't existed in previous Labour cabinets. There is no sense of entitlement, and that's why I think people who underestimate them do so at their peril. All their life it's about showing people that they're proving themselves.
Wes did a great interview with, we always plug them, so with Alistair and Rory on their leading column, and he was comparing himself to Jacob Rees-Mogg. He said his background compared to Mogg's, but they arrive at the same place. They're sitting on the same benches opposite each other, but he's tougher because he's had obstacles to overcome, and he said that's why I'm confident that I'll get stuff done. I know what it is to suffer. And
I think that's so important. I mean, so many of them have said to me, they always use the same phrase: "This isn't a game."
Yeah,
and I think that's what we've seen the last 14 years. Is people who think it's like pretty cool job being Prime Minister, I'll be good at it, like great, and I'll be able to get checkers, and I mean, it's awful. And that sense of entitlement we saw in Partygate, the sense of entitlement which means when you find out the date of the general election, before anyone else knows, you run off to the bookies to line your pocket.
Right.
That is how they behaved, and I don't think that's how, this Labour shadow cabinet, that's not what they're made of. They're made of something slightly different. I hope so anyway.
Yeah.
One of the first rows going back to when the last government formed was over who was going to get which stately home, and it ended up with Haig and Clegg having to share Chevening, which I think makes your point, really.
I asked Angela Rayner, is she looking forward to going to Dorneywood as Deputy Prime Minister? And she said, I quite like my flat in London.
Yeah.
And I says, you're not measuring the curtains. She said, Dorneywood would be a lot of curtains, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's a sort of, do I have to get the curtains for all of it? I mean, I'm sure these houses will be used because they're actually quite important on statecraft, but I don't think they're perks.
Yeah.
I know you're here because you're a Labour expert. Can we talk about Ed Davey for a moment?
Everyone's an Ed Davey expert.
What have you made about Ed Davey's campaign?
Well, I think it's been very smart in that Liberal Democrats in this election, I think, would have struggled to get noticed. He's quite a grey figure, actually, Ed Davey. He's quite similar to Keir Starmer in lots of ways. He's sort of unlikely knighthood, background of sort of family history of quite traumatic childhood, and he's had to deal with lots of really tough stuff in his life, including having a very disabled child, and that's not enough to get noticed as the Liberal Democrat leader in this election. And so he's done all these stunts, and that's great. I don't think Starmer could have done it. I think that's not what people expect from a Prime Minister. But I think he's been clever and he's got noticed. I also think he's fought quite a disciplined campaign over the last few years. He's recognised that there's very few Lib Dem Labour marginals, and there's no point doing that thing which the Liberal Democrats did in the last election, thinking that they're going to win 120 seats and realign politics by taking on Labour. So he hasn't been playing games. He hasn't been sort of trying to outflank Labour on Europe all the time or carp and criticise Keir Starmer. He's been focused on winning these blue wall seats, and that's probably the best way of getting a change of government. I think he's been very disciplined about it. I think he deserves some admiration.
If Farage is elected to Clacton, Tom, do you think he'll be more of a pain to Labour or to the Tories?
I don't know. I think initially you're going to see this meltdown of the Tory party.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's quite the same meltdown we expected. So until Farage said what he did about Ukraine, I think it could have been, is Farage going to take over the Tory party? Lots of Tories would quite like Farage to lead them.
Absolutely.
But then he said what he said about Ukraine. He showed he'd just been spending too much time hanging out with Trump in America.
Yeah.
That's not part of the British tradition. There's a sort of isolationist tradition in America. We don't have it here. We're actually really proud of the role we played in fighting fascism in the Second World War. We're proud of that. That's a blood bond with Europe. Even if we're not part of the EU, I think it's a blood bond. And Farage completely got that wrong. And even Boris Johnson saw that Farage had crossed a line.
And we were discussing this the other day, the Mail.
David Gork made a really good point. He wrote this piece in the New Statesman saying, if Boris Johnson wanted to do the right thing for once in his life, he should have spent last weekend in Clacton campaigning against Nigel Farage. Of course, Boris Johnson couldn't do the right thing once in his life. He was on holiday. But I think there's potential, I think, for the Tory party to draw a border between themselves and reform. Now, we shouldn't get too hyperbolic if Farage wins a seat. I mean, there were some hyperbolic claims about George Galloway winning a seat. Everything's going to be different. I don't think I've heard of George Galloway since.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I think Farage, you can campaign against what he represents, which is someone who's trying to get a foothold for far-right politics in this country. And then you can campaign against who he is, someone who actually makes quite a lot of mistakes.
Yes.
What he said about Ukraine, what he said about the NHS are mistakes. And, he's a vain person who dips in and out of politics. I don't think he'd have been around if he'd remained leader of whichever party he represented. He retires, then he comes back. That's how he succeeds, in a way. Always as a sort of new broom, always an insurgent. He's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think I think he will be part of an attempt to turn our politics into something more resembling France or the United States. And as we said at the start of this, I think it's a really important moment for people who believe in liberal democracy to stand up to him and stand up to him the right way, not by aping him, but by beating him.
It's really interesting because we've been through a period, I think, where politics has almost risked becoming a branch of the entertainment industry, right? Trump, obviously, Boris Johnson. Liz Truss, actually, I think, falls into that category in a ludicrous, comic way. And Farage, for sure, is, a peer-end entertainer, the cheeky chap. What you're describing, Tom, is a four-square challenge to that. And it strikes me as both the morally correct thing to do, but hard.
It is hard, but it's harder to do in opposition.
Yes.
When you can't actually do something in government and show something for it. So Starmer said to me he's achieved less in the last 9 years than at any other point in his life. Because the whole point of politics is to do something and change people's lives.
Yeah.
And all he's been able to do is talk about what he might do, or more recently, what he might not do. And I have this line at the end of my book, and I've used it a few times, so I apologise if you've heard it before, but I think it's right, that this idea of politics as spectacle, as a sort of light entertainment or sport, is not helping us. Johnson gathered his great big crowd around him as he set fire to lots of things that we really value and need in this country.
Yeah.
Starmer, by contrast, if you talk to him for any time, he's always talking about the building blocks of my argument. He puts one building block on top of another. And who's going to watch that? That's really boring. The difference is, you come back and he might have built a house, whereas Johnson's just got some ashes.
And the biggest example, I think, is Cameron setting fire to the whole relationship with the EU just to tidy things up in his own party, which backfired massively.
Well, that dynamic of the Conservative Party's internal politics has caused so much harm.
Yeah.
And Cameron, having the Brexit referendum and indeed sort of moving to austerity to show his right wing, not for national purpose, not for the national need, but because of clever politics. Then we have Brexit, a completely unnecessary thing. I mean, at the time, he decided to have a Brexit referendum. It wasn't even in the top 10 priorities for British people.
Cared. Yeah.
It was a priority for Tory party membership.
Yeah.
And that's a problem of empowering the membership. Theresa May, decent woman, couldn't get a decent Brexit deal because of her party. And then we go off into Johnson and Truss and Sunak. And, that sense of patriotism, not sort of national, but just patriotism, like, I want government that actually tries to make the country better. I went to Grimsby Town Football Club with Starmer the other day, and it's interesting watching him when he talks to groups of people. You don't see it on TV, but they all said afterwards, he actually listened. And you can't fake listening. When someone's pretending to listen but not.
Yeah.
And he wasn't faking, and they saw that. But this young woman said, politics just seems like a game, doesn't it? Just like it's you versus the Tories, like, it doesn't seem relevant to me. And he suddenly became really animated. And so I totally agree. Most people, most normal people, don't spend all the time worrying whether someone voted Tory or Labour at the last election. That's one of the reasons why politics doesn't look normal to most people. It's one of the reasons for this disconnect between politics and the people. And he said there's lots of decent people out there who voted Conservative or whatever, who want to make their families better off, their community better off, and their country better off, and I want to work with them. And I think that sense of rising above politics, look, it's going to be really difficult. You're right. The challenges facing him are enormous. They could overwhelm him. At the same time, he's got quite underwhelming political skills. He's not going to inspire the nation with a great speech. He'll never do that, right? He's not going to, build a coalition by charming everyone in the Labour Party. He can't be bothered, and he's got more important priorities. So there's a sort of those lack of political skills, which I think have served him quite well, and so far may actually trip him up as he goes on. But I think potentially he could be someone who looks like and represents this country better than the people who've tried to drive straight lines through it and divide it over recent years. And that's something to cling on to, and that's something that I think progressively minded people should try and help him achieve, rather than fold their arms, turn their backs or carp. This is a battle now against far-right populism. It's a battle for decent grown-up government, and we've got an opportunity, I hope, after July the 4th, after Thursday.
What's the single biggest quality he's going to need in the next 5 years, assuming he becomes Prime Minister on Thursday night, Friday morning?
I think he needs to maintain a sense of direction. I mean, he's set out these missions, which are massively underreported, but I think the danger is collapsing into some sort of technocracy, which, you take a series of good decisions, sensible decisions, which I think he wants to do, but unless you've got some sense of values underpinning it and some sort of direction, it won't be coherent. So I think he must maintain that sort of sight on some goals. If we're making progress step by step, it's got to have a direction. We can't just be wandering around the field.
You've got to know where you're going to get there. Yeah. All right, brilliant.
Brilliant.
Tom, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's lovely
really
to be
exciting here. Week at last. We're getting close to the result.
Look forward to singing again on the other side.
Yeah.